you'll get a pretty good view from a satellite. Same thing can happen when you're listening to our podcast. Practitioners with thorough knowledge, internationally recognized experts, together with passionate specialists, can take you to new heights. Our aim is to make you ask the right questions and be curious. Self-development is more of a lifelong learning than a sprint. This show is hosted by a former business journalist, a current communication specialist, Siiri Liiva. You can listen our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. So today we're going to discuss with Peter Vesterbacka and Andreas Weisbach educational innovation, modern approaches to business, including scientific approaches, and the role of good leadership in educational innovation. I am the host, Siiri Liiva. As is accustomed to Satelliit podcast, I always start with a rather personal question, and this will be no different this time. So my first question is, what was the last educational innovation you personally got acquainted with and were really fascinated about? What kind of potential does it have? What kind of future do you see for it? And Peter, let's start with you.
Yeah, that's kind of a good question. I think that kind of like old, or I don't know if it's an innovation, but I think it's more like a cultural thing and one that I think is pretty cool, and that is at Finnish or many Finnish schools. It's not at all, but I think maybe also some schools here that you actually take off your shoes inside, and that's something that we've replicated in a lot of startups. Many startups in Finland. You basically have the same culture that you take off your shoes. And I think that it makes it, first of all, more informal, and also it makes you feel at home. So I think that it's actually a very small, I don't know if I would call it an innovation, but I think it's something that then makes you feel at home, in school or at the company in question. And I was actually in Vietnam now for like 2 weeks, and one of the companies that we visited, they had the same policy, and I was immediately like, hey, this is cool that, like you take off your shoes and everything. I don't know how common this is, around the world, but I think that it's a great way to make things more approachable and people like feel comfortable and they feel at home. So that's kind of like an innovation that I just kind of like noticed, and I think it's and I don't know if I would call it an innovation, but it's a cultural thing, and I think it's important and it's nice.
Yes, actually, when I was working as business journalist, many startups I visited here in Estonia have the same kind of rule or cultural thing. Yeah. And you're right about it. It kind of makes difference in the introduction.
Yeah, because I think that when you take off your shoes, then it's like it already changes the, like the whole thing. That you kind of feel at home, and it's like a small thing, but can be very, very important.
Thank you, Peter. Andreas.
The latest one probably for me was I teach from time to time courses on subjects which I'm interested in, and because my interest is in things like history, philosophy, and literature, I was teaching a course on Greek mythology. On Odyssey and the Greek sort of civilization before its dark ages as well. And what was interesting, because doing this at a business school, obviously, given the audience, creating the link between the Odyssey by Homer and today's business world and the challenges and the commonalities and what can be learned, because a lot of the stuff that we're coming up with now, even in terms of innovation, is just long forgotten old stuff, which for me was extremely interesting. So things like, limited and shared exclusive knowledge being shared is something a little bit like taking off the shoes, is something which creates intimacy. Things like the power of nostalgia for certain things as a marketing tool. And this whole link between the rather more pragmatical worlds of business and normally the more, I guess people call them fluffy worlds of humanities was something which for me just literally because we finished the course like 2 or 3 weeks ago is just fresh in my mind. That was probably for me the most interesting part. Not that it's even particularly innovative. It's just that creating links between things that you don't normally create links between was fascinating.
I think in many fields there is a saying that we shouldn't forget about history, but we should learn from it. In that sense, it's also bringing parallels with Greek mythology in business field as well.
There is another saying which says the only thing history teaches you is that you can learn nothing from history. So
Because it tends to repeat itself.
Unfortunately, at times it can.
Okay. As in today's discussion, we're going to focus a lot on educational innovation. Then let's kickstart by trying to give a content to what it means. How would you personally describe what is educational innovation better?
I think that maybe one important thing there is that from my perspective, more about like what it's not.
Okay.
And first of all, I'm not like a huge fan of like this whole like edtech like as a term. So I think that we have a lot of people who and find our like friends in Silicon Valley are particularly like good at that like everything is a technology problem. And I think that it's a little bit like if you only have a hammer, then everything is a nail. And education, for the most part, it's not a technology problem. I mean, it's you can. It's a little bit like in business. If you have like a bad process, if you automate it, it's still bad. So if you have a bad educational system and then you can like make it digital, you automate it, it's still like super bad. And as I mentioned, I was just in Vietnam, and if I look at like all of Asia, kind of like they're huge fans of education in Finland and what we have here, like in Estonia as well. And then if you start thinking about like, okay, so why? And we actually have now a situation in Finland where the fastest growing student population is actually Vietnamese high school students. So students. Yeah, so we have a lot of people now from Vietnam and other places as well that come to Finland for high school, so not just university. And I just had an event Thursday, Friday in Parkano that you might never have heard of. It's like in the middle of Finland, middle of nowhere. But there's like this gathering of these smaller high schools, and we also have some of the Vietnamese high school students there. And talking about their experiences in Finland compared to then like back in Vietnam, and then they were asked like, okay, so what's like the big difference and like all of that, and then they said that okay, that Vietnam and I think Asia for the most part, it's super competitive. I mean, it's like from kindergarten that you have to get into the best school, and then from the high school to the best university, and it's like testing, and learning for tests and like all of that. And then they said that, okay, now doing high school in Finland is very different. They actually have school, but they also have like time for other things. So it's not like they get home, like back in Vietnam at 5 and then they do 3 hours of homework. But they actually like do shorter school day and then, maybe half an hour, max an hour on homework. And then they go out and like, actually one of the students told us that she now loves walking in the forest, and also said that okay, if she would have said that back in Vietnam, that hey, I love going for walks in the forest, then the people will look at her that are you crazy? Like, really? What? You going out in the forest to walk? That's like. But anyway, the point here is that if we look at Asia, and then I think for us here, then we understand what actually makes education here good, that we're learning for life, not for tests. And we basically, there's actually this thing called life, and it's not just, like school, work, but it's like a balance. So I think that this is actually the kind of like the most important thing when I look at like innovation, education, all that we don't try to make all of us like into this kind of like Asian model where, it's only learning for tests and you're only doing school and you don't have time for anything else. So I think that innovations where we can make the teachers become more, let's say, efficient. So if you can take out a lot of this kind of, let's say, time that goes into various like bureaucratic processes. So if you can free up the teachers to do their job, I think that those kind of innovations are like super, super important. Then automating kind of like bad educational systems, I think is like bad innovation. And I think that we should focus on like the quality and if we can support teachers. So maybe one more, it's like long answer, but what I'm not a fan of. We were actually in Moscow when you could still go there. But anyway, and we met with the education ministry many years ago, and then Steve Wozniak, so co-founder of Apple, and then he was, like this was when the iPad had come out and all that, and he told like the minister there that we're going to replace all teachers with computers, and then people look at, okay, tell us more. But I mean, this is the problem I have with like a lot of the technology approaches to education, that we have people who, really smart people who think that, okay, like it's a technology problem, we'll just like replace the teachers with computers. And I think that just gives away that you know nothing about education. I mean, then it's like, so maybe the most important thing when you look at this, that we bring together people who actually understand education and people who understand technology. Typically, it's not the same people.
Okay.
So long answer, but
No worries. As I'm also part-time teacher, then I can totally relate to this part of getting rid of the administrative tasks.
Because
exactly. There's a lot of them, for practically everything.
Yeah, but I think that it's everywhere, and I think that that's what we should do, is that we should enable teachers to teach. I mean, that's like the thing that teachers love to do, and then like the other stuff, not so much.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Peter. Andreas, what are your thoughts?
I mean, if it's so educational innovation, it's sort of, being reductionist, it starts off with what is education and what is innovation. So it's
but to put it shortly,
there is a classical definition to this, I think, which is something along the lines of solving some sort of an issue, problem, or challenge which is related to education through a means or by a way that is new, novel, better. I mean, that's the standard definition of educational innovation. But I think that what Peter is saying is actually very, very right. That assumes that we all have a clear understanding of what that problem, challenge, or issue actually is. Now, I don't, when you look at literacy rates, being a historian by education myself, I always take sort of a long-term view on this. If you look at literacy rates and numeracy rates and their evolution over the last 200 years, certainly in the Western world, education has done a pretty good job. We're not looking at, a few marginal percentage points. We're looking at, 8-9-fold increases in the levels of literacy. I can't remember by heart, but, from something like 10-12% back in 1810 to, almost 90-95, in some cases more percent now. But I basically agree with what Peter is saying. I think that technology is, it's a tool. It's like any other tool for achieving something. It's not a means or it's not an objective in its own right. So what perhaps I see, again, it depends a little bit on the educational systems, but what I see a lot in this part of the world is not just studying to learn for tests, but the answer which education answers is quite often the answer to the question how. How you do things. At times, there is an answer to the question, what? But what I'm increasingly beginning to see a great deal of shortage of is the answer to the question, why? Why does something get done? What is the purpose of something? And at the very basic level, education is essentially, I can see why people talk about EdTech. I can see why there are parallels with IT companies, because they're in the same business in a certain way. The business is that you somehow organize, structure, and package information, which you are then conveying to an audience through some sort of a means to do so. But at the very bottom of it, education is something much more different. I mean, for me, education basically answers three very basic questions, which is who am I? That's maybe the first question. Mm-hmm. The second question is a context question, which is where am I? So, there's me. Then there is what is around me. Mm-hmm. And then the third question is, what am I and what are we actually doing? Mm-hmm. Which is, what is the activity between the me and the context and the us and the context? So the short answer to this is it's somehow solving a problem through a new way. The long answer is, I think, really taking a very deep look at the fundamental of what is this word education actually supposed to be addressing. Mm-hmm. And that at times I fear we're falling a little bit short on, because the value of a walk in a forest quite often is significantly greater than the value of 2 hours spent staring at a computer screen, watching a lecture at 2 times the nominal speed to cover it quickly. So,
or trying to remember something very meticulously.
Exactly.
At the same time. Okay. One of the first stories I wrote as a business journalist some 8 years ago was about educational innovation in India. It was about the educational initiative of Professor Sukata Mitra, who had been leading different educational innovation initiatives for 30 years. And he called his initiatives or experiments hole-in-the-wall experiments, because he believed that a group of children is able to learn anything if you give them access to internet and take into account their inquisitive nature and give them moderate guiding. Peter, would you agree with this approach?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely works. And I think that kids and humans in general can figure it out and figure out pretty much anything. So I think that's... and it's also kind of like the role of the teacher is really, or should be more of a coach. And I think that is also in many places kind of like a big transformation that again, you have to move away from this know-all, role of the teacher. And again, an example there that when we started this, I mentioned this high school program and international students now going to high school in Finland. So we then, when we started, we also sent teachers to Uzbekistan as one example. And then we had a Finnish teacher, Miljana. She was in a small city called Sarashan, and then teaching Finnish, the Finnish language. And she had been there for a month when we visited. And this was kind of last year. And then all the kids told us that Miljana is the best teacher ever, and they were like, okay, so she's been here for a month, and so why? Mm-hmm. And then they said that, yeah, because she's like a normal person. And I think that this is again, we just take that for granted that, teachers are people too, mm-hmm. It's just the way it is. Mm-hmm. And I mean, of course, some teachers might want that to be a bit different. And in the good old days when, you mm-hmm. had respect and, kids didn't question and challenge you all the time. But the point that the Uzbek kids were making that then, now they have this teacher from Finland and, she's a normal person and you can talk to her and you can discuss and all of that. So I think that then, with your or the India example of hole in the wall and having access to the internet and a bit of guidance. And I think that that's actually how it should work, that the teachers help guide the students and help them learn to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that is kind of very important. And it's many times you get better results when you step away. And I think this again, coming back to this Asian model and the challenges is that there in many cases you still have this situation where you tell the students that don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, do this, do this, do this. You're being told what to do, what not to do, all the time. And then you learn that is how it works and you don't take any initiative yourself. And I think that this is the exact opposite of what we need. We need people now who can take initiative and, can go to that hole in the wall and they will like Google and, find out and like then, like whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And then, like the teacher's role is just that, okay, that's like the hole in the wall, go there and okay, there's this Google thing and blah, 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 and then you'll figure it out. So I think that the India experiment is actually very good, and it's actually really like describing what education today should be about.
Mm-hmm. And this professor actually, he even got the DEET prize for one of his initiatives. He made retired teachers support children in various ages and various subjects, so that they were like kind of grannies who were supporting those children. Yeah. Okay, Andreas, any thoughts you want to add?
Well, the short answer to your question is yes. I'm by no means, an expert on pedagogical approaches or teaching. But if you combine curiosity, autonomy, purpose, and a sense of direction, I think the outcome is always going to be a pretty good one. Mm-hmm. And maybe actually just to widen on that, I mean, I only say it because my wife is a neuroscientist who deals with this a bit. In fact, she teaches a course called Learning How to Learn. If you look at what's happening in neuroscience, then the other components that are there is that this brain plasticity, which is there in kids, is also very, very present in adults, because it has always been traditionally thought that, you're a kid, you're curious, you want to go out, do things, discover, etc. Then you get a bit older, you want it less, then you get really old and you can't be bothered to do anything and you're unreactive. So that apparently is not true, is that the same applies very much to adults.
That's a good news.
It is, for me it's good news. For the rest, for everybody else, I can't speak. And then maybe also there is one other element that I would add to it, which is related to stress, which is that your cognitive performance is generally inhibited by high stress levels. So if you're able to do this in an environment which is rather supportive, rather guiding, and not exactly as Peter was saying, this, no, don't do it. This, no, don't do it. This, oh, you must be really stupid. I mean, just essentially removing the stress element generally tends to enhance performance. But then again, I can only speculate on this because this is something which I actually know very little about. But just logically, it seems to me to make sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Peter, what is your opinion? Is true educational innovation taking place more in developing countries than in developed countries?
Impossible to answer. I have no data on that, but I think that it's happening everywhere. So then is it more in a particular place than somewhere else? Difficult to say. But I think that there's kind of no limit, geographically speaking, or then from kind of market maturity or anything like that. I might even say that I think that there might be more innovation happening in less developed kind of markets and developed educational systems. So typically when you get same thing with big companies, big corporations, that you have rules and regulations for everything. So I think that if you're a bit less developed, then there's more freedom to kind of innovate and do new things.
And you have also maybe less resources, so you have to be more.
And typically that helps if you don't have everything. And I think that that's actually one concern if I look at education in Finland and if you look at education in the West in general, that where things are pretty good. So then it's a little bit why bother?
We are in our comfort zones.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Andres?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to answer this.
Okay.
I mean, you
still want to give it a try?
Well, I mean, I can, but it's just going to be a very cliched comment, I think. I don't think there's going to be much else to it. I think that we are probably more scraping at the edges in our established sort of more developed educational systems, simply because it is so ingrained into our societal tissue as a whole, and educational systems in the more developed countries just historically fulfill functions which have absolutely nothing to do with education. You know, it goes back to the Industrial Revolution and to the very basic notion that you have parents who have to go to work and you've got to put the kids somewhere. And I think that's a bit more ingrained nowadays here, in the sense that that education as a whole permeates the overall societal structure, perhaps more than it does in developing countries. But I simply would not dare to say that the innovation, therefore, is taking more place in developing countries. If you look at, again, I don't want to really bring it down to digital or to technology, but you know, the largest educational technology company in India, which I think is called BYJU, is certainly as popular and as high uptake as some of the more established platforms, you know, like the Coursera's, etc., in the developed countries. So, I mean, the answer is I don't know the answer to this, and I don't even want to speculate, because in the developed societies, education is a very, very conservative sector. It's you know, it's certainly not fintech, and it's not, you know, it's not things which or it's not areas which are moving at great speed. And I can understand it's dominated by the state and by the public sector. It is conservative. It is, I think, very risk averse, and I can see why that is the case, because the normal incentive of any public sector system is towards the avoidance of mistakes, rather than taking risks. And similarly, especially when you take something as fundamental to a society as the next generation of kids, who is going to put their head up and risk something in an all or nothing venture? You know, it's not, I take a risk here, it goes wrong. Okay, you know, I either lose a bit of money or I lose a bit of my time or something else. It's all manageable. If you do that at scale, in an area of society which is as central and as fundamental as the young generation, I think very few people have the courage.
Okay. Peter, you want to add something or react on something?
No, but I think it's a good point that many places then schools and education also fulfill Kanak roles and responsibilities that have nothing to do with Kanak learning or anything like that. And it just reminded me, I had a discussion with Arne Duncan, who was Secretary of Education for Obama. And then we had an argument about like the length of the school day, because back then, I don't know, it might still be the case, but there's a big argument in the US that they need to make the school days longer because of China, and they need to be competitive. And, you know, like, and then my point was that, hey, you know, like in Finland, we have like short school days, and we're doing like pretty well. So I don't think that the quality of education has a lot to do with like the length of the school day. But then Arne, Duncan, the Secretary of Education, told me that, hey, Peter, I'm from Chicago, and if you let the kids out in the street, they will shoot people. And I was like, okay, you know, and then in that case, you know, like the role of education was to keep the kids locked up in school so they don't go out in the streets and shoot people. And of course, that is a, you know, different perspective of the role of schools and education that, you know, like most people here probably don't share, but it's just like different like perspectives.
Yes, I feel the same, that it's different perspectives. You could also think about extracurricular activities instead of keeping them in the school
locked up.
During the school lessons. Okay, last 2 years have been quite challenging to educational systems all around the world. Distant learning has become a new normal, so to say, and also a major shift has been made in teachers' technological skills. But how do you see, have we really seen any educational innovation during this time of corona pandemic? And Andreas, let's start with you this time. You have children who go to school.
I do. I think probably the largest innovation in terms of the impact of Corona has been the engagement of parents in the education of their kids.
Yeah.
So now they know what their children do at school finally.
But I mean, look, it's in a way, of course, there have been changes. And again, I don't want to preach the technology side of this, but there has been a dramatic increase in, distance learning, and I think that will spill over into blended instruction as well. Whether that's actually an innovation or just a speeding up of an existing trend is very difficult for me.
Mm-hmm.
Is very difficult for me to say. I think what we certainly saw, and I'm not here talking about, school-age kids, I'm talking more here at the university level. What concerns EBS, I think EBS was extremely fortunate. I'd like to say that, it was because, yeah, in a way it was, just because of a strategic vision, but because we'd managed to invest significantly into our IT infrastructure prior to the pandemic. Following on the notion, I mean, there's obviously a whole line of thinking behind it, which is that a lot of the content that is being offered nowadays is basically becoming a commodity. It's I can come back to this later, but the notion that you need to have a professor in class or in front of, a group of, and I'm talking university students here, delivering everything on a given subject, that can be econometrics or marketing or whatever. If you look at, the basics of marketing courses around the world, they're all pretty similar. Mm-hmm. So you have an option now. You either go to a business school, pay a significant amount of money to attend this course, or you go to, YouTube? edX or Coursera or to YouTube, in fact, and you get, pretty much the same content. So I see that there have been some speeding up of things. I mean, we are increasingly being, inspired perhaps is the wrong word here, but we're certainly trying to learn a lot from a number of experiments in faculties going on around the world, which is that there are actually professors who are designing their course in a way that 3/4 of the course is a combination of MOOCs, in effect. MOOCs being massive online courses. And it kind of makes sense now that you come to think of it. I'm here in Estonia. I'm going to do a degree, be it at BA, MA, at times even PhD levels, I think would actually find this quite beneficial. And I have a professor who has the option of teaching, say, 15, ainepunktide ECTSs or, the sort of standard measuring system, on his own or together with his colleagues from the faculty. Or he comes to me and says, well, here is a course that I have designed. My own teaching, or it's not even teaching necessarily, it's more facilitating, guidance, contextualization, everything, in fact, that Peter was talking about beforehand, will only form a fifth of this course. But your course on marketing will consist of an online course by a professor from Harvard, for 3 ECTS, from a professor from Oxford, 3 ECTS, a professor at Stanford, 3 ECTS, and some other professors. Some are all looking at different angles of the problem. And then we will spend, 20 hours in class, in workshops, discussing, debating this between ourselves. Now, what do you achieve with that? You achieve a dramatic reduction in the cost of what you're doing. Because, we're not going to go to the basics of the digital economy here, but, this is easily replicable. In fact, it's there already. If I was thinking about, university once again, I think long and hard whether it makes more sense for me to pay $30 for a Harvard professor's course on marketing, or go and buy the same thing, from wherever I happen to be. So you improve the quality, you decrease the cost, both for the school and for the student, and you add value where it is your role to add value, which is to the specific circumstances of the cohort or the group that you happen to be teaching. What is there not to like about this? So I think that, things like these, so I think that it has sped up a number of innovations, but what it has also, I think, made us very aware of is the fact that students are dying, they're not anymore, they were dying to get back to school. because it gets a bit boring sitting in front of the screen all the time.
Yes, you want the social interaction and the social context.
And that, is as much a part of your educational experience, which is to make you a functioning member of society in a certain way, than, sitting there learning formulas all day, which I don't for a moment disagree that it's extremely important. But education once again has slightly more than opening your head and pouring in content. So it's
Yes, it's also about emotional intelligence and social skills. This also plays a huge role how you get by in life in addition to your knowledge. Peter, have you seen any major educational innovations during the last year because of corona pandemic?
I don't know if we've seen any kind of like major like breakthroughs, but I think that the most important thing is that now everybody understands that it works. So I mean that basically you can have people attending things remotely, but I think that for the most part it's just that. So I mean we haven't really changed. We still, for the most part, teachers are then just doing a normal lesson, and it just happens that people then sit behind like a Google Meet or Zoom or whatever. But I think that the important thing is really that now it's it's accepted, and it's just like normal. So I think that is really important, and then I hope that we'll see more innovative uses, and also that pandemic or not, that why not then make use of this, that if you really don't have anything besides like a standard lecture or lesson, then people might just as well attend remotely, and then you can have more of the and different interaction like in class when people are present. So I think that we could make all of education like more flexible like that, and I think that we can have increased mobility, and I think also that we should start looking at like the whole like system, that again, if you think about smaller nations, smaller cities, villages, remote areas, all of that, Finland, Estonia, good examples that maybe we have in the whole country just a handful of people who want to learn, say, Vietnamese. So then okay, it doesn't make sense that okay, in this small village, can we have like Vietnamese lessons? And okay, we don't even have a teacher. But okay, if we have one in Estonia, then we can deliver that to kind of like any school, and we can start like making things a bit more like available and accessible. So I think that's things that we need to start rethinking how we deliver these things, that it doesn't always have to be like in class and 20 people show up or whatever it is. So I think that is something that I hope that we'll see more like innovation and more like new ways of using these things. That for the most part, I think that we just we made it remote and that's it. So there's like not much innovation in that. I think that's just like business as usual. So of course there are some exceptions and people are using the tools more efficiently, but for the most part it was just like, okay, now you're sitting behind a screen instead of sitting behind your desk in class. So I don't think that we saw any. I mean, there are innovations happening all the time, but I don't think that we saw any kind of like major like innovation.
Okay, moving on now from the deep discussions on educational system to business sector in general, where during the last, let's say, 20 years, there have been major shifts. We are talking about old economy, we are talking about new economy, and companies who represent this or that. Peter, you have been a lot connected to different kind of startups. You have also initiated probably the world best known startup event, Slush.
Mm-hmm.
What was your idea behind this initiative?
Yeah, I mean, like actually, Slush story goes way back. So it kind of like started with me giving a speech to 600 students at Aalto University in 2007. So long time ago.
15 years.
Yeah, really long time. But anyway, but the thing is that back then I was talking about startups and entrepreneurship, and I was like actually my. The title of my talk was that it's okay to be an entrepreneur. So that was like kind of like the thing. It's like a very Finnish and I think Estonian thing that we're kind of like, when people ask us how we're doing, like, yeah, it's okay. Even if it's like best day
or
ever.
normal.
It's
okay,
like,
or
yeah,
normal.
it's like just, like it is what it is. But anyway, so my point also there that, of course, then that it's fantastic to be an entrepreneur is kind of like the message. But yeah. It's okay, but yeah. So then I was talking about that and sharing some experiences, startup success stories, and like stuff like that. And then I asked the students, okay, like how many of you guys are going to start a company or join a startup, once you graduate, or like even before. And in 2007, 600 of our best students, 3 raised their hand. All the others wanted to go and work for Nokia or Kone or Wärtsilä or the government, or something like that, and meaning that everybody just was interested in kind of like, good job, maintaining the status quo, like let's not rock the boat, and like all of that. So then, of course, that's like super like sad, and like a big concern that if nobody kind of like wants to change the world, it's not going to be like good thing. So we had to do something. So that's why we started Slush. So we started Slush not to kind of like make it the biggest and best startup event on the planet, which of course
this is
also,
how it's called by now.
Yeah, that's like what it became. But the main thing that the objective was to change the mindset, change the whole attitude, and actually 5 years after starting Slush, back to Aalto, same talk, same question, more than half the hands went up. So I think that really changed kind of like
more than half.
Yeah,
wow.
And that's now I actually go to like a lot of high schools, and we're taking kind of like younger and younger audiences, and it's the same. So I think that we've seen a big change, in Finland, in the region, and of course, I mean, we see that everywhere here in Estonia. I mean, it's like amazing development, and I think that that's also, if you look at like then back to kind of like learning and education, all that. If you look at Slush, it's actually the biggest kind of like entrepreneurial learning program. So we have 2,600 volunteers from more than 60 countries that make it happen. Mm-hmm. So you basically do Slush as a volunteer for a year, 2, 3 years. So you learn how to build the biggest and best startup event, and then you go out and build the biggest and best startups. And we have many, many examples of that. So I think that we need these kind of things. And I think events are a good tool for making this kind of like transformation happen. So that's kind of like why we started Slush. And I mean, it's kind of like a never-ending kind of like change and challenge. But it's as I always say, it's a good start.
Yes, it's a very good start. Andreas, what do you think? What is the role of startups in bringing innovative ways of either teaching business or being entrepreneurial?
Well, being entrepreneurial is what a startup does. So you would imagine that it's that they have quite a lot to contribute. I mean, sorry, I will actually answer the question, but what Peter says is actually fundamental. And the reason it's fundamental is that it's not just at the sort of micro level of what we have in Finland and Estonia, but this is something, I think there are systematic surveys which compare the entrepreneurial attitudes of young people in China, in the US, and in the EU. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the greatest weaknesses that the EU has. I understand.
Except for here.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, basically, we're like way ahead of the rest of Europe.
Exactly.
Anyway, yeah.
No, but you're right. Yeah. Except for here, and maybe a couple of other places like Berlin, Barcelona, which are basically
Berlin has nothing. Come on. Berlin and Barcelona is just marketing. I mean,
you think like it's purely marketing?
Yeah. I mean, Germany, like if you go to Germany, go to Berlin, what do? They copy everything. German people copy everything. I mean, that's like okay, but I mean, like if you talk about creating new stuff, not so much. So but anyway, I mean, I think
it's a fair point. I think that culturally, actually, you're right. Given the systematic way in which Germany has ridden the industrial wave, which is very structured, which is very orderly,
nice cars.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that the culture is very good for that. Yeah. But in the more chaotic environment of what's happening everywhere, I think that they're probably not as well equipped. The general point was that basically in both China and the US, the proportion of young people who want to become entrepreneurs is almost twice as big or twice as high, as it is in the EU. Notwithstanding the point that this is it is a different story, I think, here for us. But answering your question, I think that this is so the short answer is startups as well as established companies, actually. And I would even go beyond the business sector, which comes back to this notion of what we were discussing with the hole in the wall problem, which actually is a much older one, bringing back to people learning best when they do things.
Yes.
So this learning by doing is absolutely central. Yeah. And again, let's actually look at the innovations that have come out over the last, say, 2 or 3 decades. I would say that the output or the innovation which has emerged from non-academic environments has dramatically exceeded that which has emerged from academic environments. It is not quite as simple as that, because a lot of the groundwork, especially in terms of base science or basic science and basic research, has obviously been done at universities. And, you can quote the different parts and components of the iPhone, which have come together, through university environments. But my point is that we've always, the educational model tends to be quite linear. You're born, you go to kindergarten, you go to school, you go to university if you're lucky, you do a BA, you do an MA, you do a PhD. At one stage, you either stay there and you spend your life in academia, or you leave the academic environment and supposedly start implementing what you have learned in the real world. And a lot of the notion, and this is also a part of actually what we're trying to do at EBS, is to turn that in a way where the interaction is much more two-way. Because undoubtedly, especially in areas of entrepreneurship, management, marketing, basically what a business school does, the practical experience is out there in the real world. So it's not just bringing in practitioners to teach, but it's also actually linking to the sort of, let's call it the overall academic quality and academic output, what gets done in the real world. So in a way, I think, again, I speak here purely from what I see as a business school perspective, is that we in a certain way see ourselves as becoming an odd hybrid between a degree university, a research institute, a consultancy, an accelerator, incubator, venture builder / equity investor, in effect. So the notion is that we will try to take what business education is beyond just what is science and what is teaching, which is to combine both the elements of the real world with what we get from the academic settings, and then mix that in a very sort of lifelong learning setting, which one is because business happens in the real world. It doesn't just obviously happen in academia, but also just because, being a private university, if you look at this continuum of basic research at one extreme and the market on the other extreme, then what you will see is that most of the publicly funded universities will always be much more towards the basic research, the more sort of, let's say, scientific application side, just the scientific side of things, which means that as an institution which deals in business and related areas, it's, you don't really need a Nobel Prize to understand where you're going to position yourself in that market. And that is going to be closer to real life and closer to real activity, inevitably. So the answer to your question is that it's very relevant.
Okay, Peter?
Yeah, I think I always kind of define entrepreneurship, and entrepreneurs are people who do things. And I think that, from my perspective, it really kind of is as simple as that. And we need this kind of entrepreneurial mindset, not only in startups, but we need that in big companies, in government, we need it everywhere. So people need to kind of do stuff. I also think that it's like very interesting, and it's absolutely like the thing that we need to look at is like if you compare now US, China, EU, and then kind of like this entrepreneurial mindset and attitude and like all of that. I think that we can do better, but then I think that we're doing really good, or at least we're off to a good start. If I look at like, I always talk about like the finest Bay Area, so where Finland, Estonia, parts of Sweden, and we're actually the most successful region globally if we look at like number of startups, number of unicorns, number of, or amount of venture capital invested per capita. I mean, we're like way ahead of the US, way ahead of China, way ahead of like everybody. And then also, I mean, I started my kind of like entrepreneurial journey, if you will, at like the company that Bill and Dave started their garage in Palo Alto in California. And that was like HP, but they also like then started, that was kind of the birthplace of Silicon Valley. And of course, everybody always talks about Silicon Valley and all that. And it's a great place and, you know, great source of inspiration, lots of success stories and all that. But if you then look at kind of like the foundation and where it started, Stanford, Berkeley. I mean, actually, Bill and Dave got inspired to start the company because of their professor at Stanford. So I think that universities are super important as kind of like foundation and kind of like starting points for a lot of like great stuff. And the reason for that is because of the talent. So I always talk about like talent density, and that's kind of like everything I'm working on is about increasing the talent density here, like in the whole finest Bay Area. So then kind of like attracting more talent, more students, more founders, more people, basically. And I think that is really what we need in both Finland and Estonia. We have massive shortage of talent, and you see it everywhere. And it's also, if you look at, again, you know, like take Silicon Valley as an example, more than half of the founders of the successful, you know, the unicorns, you know, successful startups, more than half were not born there. So they came there, you know, because they thought, okay, Silicon Valley, I'll go there, I'll start a company, and okay, that's kind of like what happens a lot. And this is something that we're way behind on that. I mean, again, we need to do a much better job on attracting more founders. Estonia is actually way ahead of, for example, Finland when it comes to attracting international startup founders. But I think that both sides, we need to do a lot better on all like the talent attraction. And if you then look at like the big picture, the ones with the talent will win. So if we have the best talent, we have the highest talent density, we win. If we don't, then we don't win as much. So I think that it's super important. And there, I think, you know, EBS and kind of like universities, but education in general, I mean, that is huge source of gravity if I look at Finland. I mean, that's why we are now mentioned that the fastest growing kind of like part of our like student population, Vietnamese high school students. And now we're going to see, you know, like we've started teaching Finnish in more than 20 countries. So they actually learn the language and then they come to Finland. And that's something that is something I'm super excited about that, because I mean, it's amazing to see these kids, you know, first of all, they learn language and then they do like amazing when they come and do high school in Finland. So I think that that's kind of like a great way of, you know, like it's a long-term approach, but it's a great way to increasing the talent pool.
Well, startups have also brought kind of new approaches to teaching business and entrepreneurship.
Yes.
There are hackathons, there are incubators. There are even last autumn in Estonia, there started a coding school that was founded by Estonian startup founders.
Yep.
And there are already examples of workplace so-called academies. For example, Cleveron has put together its own teaching program. How much have you seen this kind of workplace designed programs during your travels?
Not enough, but I think that it's definitely more and more, and I don't think that it's maybe not that much of a like a new thing. I think businesses have always had to train people, and the best businesses have always like understood that that's what you need to do. So maybe it's more, in some cases more visible now. But I think that's something that we've had always. But maybe also because the change is faster. Technology happens faster. So companies need to do even more. So kind of like once you graduate from like EBS or from like any of the universities, you have a lot to learn. Whatever you start doing. So I think that again it comes back to this like learning by doing, and that's
lifelong learning as well.
Totally. Yeah.
You need to learn whole during your life. Okay, Andreas, I understand that EBS is also taking somewhat innovative approach to doctoral studies.
We will be testing an approach which is what we would call, I think, you can call it a sort of an applied, or I would almost call it an experimental PhD. But basically, we're splitting our PhD into two tracks, one of which is a more sort of classical academic one, and the second one is essentially this learning by doing approach. And there are so let's see how it works. We've literally just launched it, but the idea is that a lot of what is involved in doing a PhD. A PhD is not, in my mind at least, is not something that always needs to be defined. You go to a place, you stay there for 4 years, you do your research, you write your thesis, you get your PhD. I mean, again, why? Why can your PhD not be something that you are basically, for which you're collecting the data live? So your PhD thesis does not need to be, the economic development of Guatemala between 1982 and 1984. And let's analyze that for 4 years and come up with something which, contributes to the literature. You can do the data collection essentially live in terms of implementing your own business idea. And the PhD would in a certain way be a PhD plus, is that yes, you get all the requisites for a PhD, so the compulsory courses, the elective courses, combine that with what you're calling about acceleration and incubation. So you have a very intense period of the theory to practice part. And then your data collection in the end is part and parcel of the job that you're doing. Now, there are undoubtedly complications related to this, but the plus part, or the PhD plus side, comes that it also allows to build a long-term partnership with the people who are doing this PhD and provide them not only with the courses and the supervision, but also anything else they need. Product development, okay. Marketing, okay. Capital, okay. I mean, you're essentially linking what we've sort of been talking about all for the last hour, which is the academic environment and ecosystem with the real world. You could argue that this is something which would normally be, more like an MBA program rather than a PhD, but we're going to test it in the framework of the PhD program because I don't think it's really been done in this shape.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask. Are there any other this kind of examples?
So there are a number of industrial PhDs out there, which is the notion of you come, and part of the track is certainly open to that, which is that you come from a company to do your PhD at a university to solve a specific problem which is relevant to your company. So that side, I think, is more established. This notion of doing essentially, it's a PhD in management in the end, but doing a PhD on the basis of building your own venture is not something I've really seen around too much, I have to say.
Okay, and you're going to start this autumn, right? Okay. Well, fingers crossed that it will succeed.
Fingers crossed, but it's let's not be too worried about we try it.
It sounds really interesting in the sense that you can right away apply it in your own company.
Sure, it's that's basically the idea. I think that we will see probably in 2 or 3 years exactly how well it has worked. But the idea is very clear. The idea is, instead of talking about how we have to link academia and business, let's actually do it, as opposed to carry on talking about it. That's another great problem that we have again in the EU as a whole. is that number of publications, we're world leaders. Number of patents, we're world leaders. When it comes to actually applying the stuff in real life, we are not quite as good.
Lagging behind.
So having talked about it for 15 years, I think we're now going to try and do it.
Okay. Peter, how does this idea sound to you?
Sounds good. So again, it's about doing. So I think it's always good.
Exactly.
It's always good. Okay. Peter, how does leading educational innovations differ from leading or initiating regular business innovations?
I don't think that there's like any or any kind of like big difference. So I think that it's very, very much like the same thing, lead anything. So I think that, of course, big believer in like leading by examples. That's always kind of like good and kind of works in our kind of like culture, and that's always one thing. And then I think that it's about a lot of it boils down to communication. So kind of like just telling people what we're up to and what we're doing, and just repeating hundreds or even thousands of times. So I think that's in all kinds of leadership. You always have to remember that you might know or think you know where we need to go, but the rest of the team not so much. So it's again, even if you know, don't assume that everybody else understands and knows what needs to be done. So you need to kind of like communicate some more. So I think that's really super important. So you need to talk with people and share. I think that is really at the core, no matter what you do.
Mm-hmm. Okay, explain the aim, so to say. Andreas, do you want to add something?
Actually, no. I don't think there is a great deal of difference.
Okay. No. Very good. And to wrap up the topic, Andreas, some tips for people working in educational system who really want to innovate. Where should they start?
Oof.
It's not that hard question.
Well, it is. It
can be only one suggestion.
It is actually quite a hard question because it is an area which is not easy to innovate in. But I would suggest that the innovation should probably start, because I have a number of friends who've been active in this sector a long time, and they're always torn between, do I do something small, tangible, very practical locally, or do I try to change the whole system? And on the basis of the experiences that they have been describing, my advice would probably be to start at a low level of granularity, at a high level of granularity. So identify the problem or identify what you want to achieve in a way that you can actually make a tangible difference and then try to scale it, rather than take a systemic view. I mean, you have to understand the system, but take a systemic view and try to change the system as a whole. It is a difficult environment which to change.
I totally agree.
So that would probably be the main piece of advice, is to start with something that you're good at, and something that identifies a clear problem that you want to solve in a highly granular way, as opposed to saying we're going to change, the entire education system of the world. That can be the ultimate objective, but I'd start from a lower level, in this domain at least. So.
Okay, Peter, what kind of advice would you give?
Yeah, just to do it. I think that it's again
just do it.
Yeah,
just do it,
and just kind of like start. So I think that it's. Yeah, I mean, we're very, very good at always kind of like over-analyzing and like overthinking stuff. So I think that it's in education or any kind of like area, just need to get started, and then I mean, it makes sense to kind of like do something that is kind of like tangible and all of that. But I think ultimately you always want to change the world. So I think that that's kind of like my perspective, is that, okay, sometimes it takes 20 years to change the world, but that's, like fine. But you have to start sometime.
Okay, well, that wraps up our today's topic. but not the podcast itself yet, because as our regular listeners already know, at the end of each episode, we have 3 traditional questions. And I will ask these 3 questions from you as well. First question is, what is the one book about management that you would recommend to everybody who is interested in management or leadership issues and challenges? Andres, let's start with you.
Actually, I think the most useful book I have, okay, maybe it's an exaggeration, but what concerns getting things done, having the courage to do it, is actually Marcus Aurelius from the Stoic Roman emperor, who wrote a book called Meditations, which is wonderful. So every time someone tells you can't do this will go wrong, this is a disaster, whatever, you can open this book at any page. Okay. You read one page, and after 2 minutes, your mental state is completely calm, and you can just carry on going. So I will stop there. There are a number of other, more contemporary business books. We don't have to go back 2,000 years. But
this is the first time we have heard this kind of recommendation, but thank you. Okay, Peter, what is your advice?
Yeah, I think that continue from what I just said about doing things, I think that I would then pick Malcolm Gladwell's Blink, because that's a book about actually not overthinking and analyzing things, but actually just using your intuition and kind of deciding. And I think that that's something that's very important in management, in leadership, in getting stuff done. That it's always ask that when is a good time to start a company, and I always say that yesterday, but today is a pretty good day today as well. So it's always this, that it's so easy to find that, but what if it doesn't work, as you say, or it's impossible.
The excuses
are super easy, but I think that it's just better to trust your instincts and your intuition and just get it done.
Yes, I've read this book. I agree with your recommendation. It has helped me as well to make quicker decisions. Okay, second question. What is the one piece of advice you would always give about managing teams or leadership? Andreas?
I think this is an easy one.
Okay, let's hear it.
Which is always hire people who are better than you. Or, of course, it's more nuanced. Hire people who are better than you, who are different to you, who can do something better than you. The message doesn't change from that. The message is, don't be insecure and think that you know everything about the world yourself. Always bring in people who are basically, in an ideal world, yes, better than you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then that what I said before as well, that then also remember to talk with people all the time.
Very good. And the last question, what is the one skill, can be a management skill, but doesn't have to, that you feel you still need to work on yourself? And Peter, let's continue with you.
I think that you can always get better, all areas. I think that you always can be better at following up on stuff. So I think that's...
following up?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Andres?
Oh, for me, it's easy. I think it's prioritization, because I tend to get very excited by things quickly and very enthusiastic about them. And you end up, with a to-do list, which is 100 things. And then you end up in a situation where you just put pressure on yourself because you have too much to do. So prioritization is clearly one of the areas that I think needs working on a bit.
Okay, wonderful. Well, this was our today's episode. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Andreas. Thank you to our listeners, both here and behind the screen. And until next time. You can listen us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.